So Jordan Johnson wants to know your position on the Ortiz-Stanionis fight. What sort of position is Ortiz in at the moment in terms of his health? How do you see that fight going? He's been inactive too. How do you see it in the whole saga?
I mean, a couple of years ago, I dubbed Vergil Ortiz low maintenance because unlike his stablemate, Ryan Garcia, he was an easygoing guy. He was very easy. You could rely on him to show up. There was no issues. There was no drama. He just got in there and fought like hell. Now, I think he's high risk. I mean, think about this. 2 years in a row, he's had rhabdomyolysis. Now, Chris, you know a little bit about nutrition and working out. That basically means you're overtraining. You're overheating the body. And there's actually a little bit of fear that there's some permanent damage. And this is one of the issues that I have with boxing. When fighters don't fight enough, it actually becomes tougher on the body. Because, and I talk about this with Matt Macklin a lot on DMs. And Matt agrees with me because Matt says, Steve, I went through this as a fighter, and you're right. When people say fighters are better off fighting less, I completely disagree. Because nowadays what's going on is, and I've seen this firsthand at the gym, and I've been told about it. Nowadays, when a fighter comes back off a 6-7 month layoff, you know what happens? They have to drop about 35 to 40 pounds. And you know how they do that? They work out in plastics all the time, and they spar 150 to 175 rounds, and they're still getting hit. And anyone that's ever sparred, and I've sparred before, that headgear does nothing for the brain jostling. That is for cuts. People have to realize that. There's no neurological damage that is saved by being in headgear, even with the bigger gloves, okay? So my view is this. And old-time trainers that fought in that era tell me, Steve, we are much better off fighting more often, having to train less and spar a lot less rounds. And unfortunately for Vergil Ortiz, when you are being forced to go through this process, and he does tend to put on weight, and then he has to overtrain, well, now you're creating a catch-22 situation. And it's sad. And I'm going to tell you right now, we don't know what version of Vergil Ortiz exists, and Stanionis is a sledgehammer. He's a little bit stiff. He's not a speed demon, but he's got power in both hands. Okay, I think he's a little bit wide in his frame, and Vergil is a little bit straighter down the middle, and he's a little bit faster. But again, I thought Vergil was a solid favorite when they first talked about this fight, but given the health concerns, that gap to me is really closed. I am actually very curious to see what version physically currently exists of Vergil Ortiz.
I agree 100%. And it's the sort of medical issues that he's had whereby you do question how his durability will be to the body. And so there are a few guys in that division that go to the body very, very well indeed. And so there is a concern there about Vergil Ortiz and where he goes from here. And it's a real shame because in a division where I've read an article of yours in the past, again, where you gave the analogy of traffic and how some of the top guys were holding up the division. He did seem willing to take on some big risks, and he has done. But yeah, there are concerns moving forward.
Another fighter that I loved, I started his bandwagon about 4 years ago, Jaron Ennis. He at one time, when he was unattached and Cameron Duncan was running that career, took a lot of club fights, a lot of mismatches, but they stayed active. He's no longer active. Yeah. He doesn't fight anymore. And like, it's becoming a joke on Twitter that every week he says, fight announcement coming soon. And I'm like, that's like the checks in the mail. I am fearful for Jaron, who's an incredibly talented fighter. I really like him. He's becoming a gym fighter. Because every time one of his tweets pops up, instead of preparing for a fight, he's a fighter without a date that says, I just sparred 15 rounds, I ran 8 miles, and I climbed the Himalayas, and I did a decathlon, and I ran the Boston Marathon. And I'm like, okay, you're just wearing yourself out. You're just wearing yourself out. And back in the old days, Chris, you ought to look at a box record of some of these older fighters, how active they were in between even non-televised fights. The game has completely changed. That's why I don't really blame the fighters for their inactivity all the time. They are victims of this current system.
And that's why I also, going back to the Canelo Alvarez and Avni Yildirim fight, I didn't have an issue with that because it was sandwiched by 2 big fights. I don't mind the fighters are taking lesser fights, but are being more active. In other words, you have your 1 or 2 big fights a year, but then mix it up with guys you're going to beat, or, you're expected to be. But it keeps you active and it keeps you sharp. I agree with you 100%.
Chris, in any other sport, in our country, NBA, NFL, whatever, not every game is between good teams. In fact, most of the game, you kind of know who's going to win. That's why you have point spreads. They're not all 50-50. But I've always said, look, if you are a basketball fan, you kind of have the expectation you're going to see LeBron James at least 70 times, if not 82. If you are a baseball fan, you kind of know your team's going to play 162 games. In boxing, I could ask you, hey, who's your favorite 5 fighters? And I'm going to say, great, you might see them 8 times combined this year. Have fun, buddy.
Exactly.
How do you move that?
And when you talk about Canelo Alvarez, for instance, who, as you were saying, you've got massive respect for, he's going to have a very long career, huge achievements. Everybody from light middleweight to light heavyweight is calling this guy out. He can only fight one guy a year. And when he chooses the one guy he's going to fight, everybody else starts accusing him of ducking. And you're sitting there and you're thinking, maybe if these other guys started to take a few more risks to make themselves stand out from the other contenders, or even just be more active so that you're in the public eye, it doesn't seem to be a case where they want to do it. It just makes no sense to me.
John Ryder's solid. I told people this guy has built himself into a fighter. I thought he beat Callum Smith, and I like the Smith family. I know them. When they came out here to L.A., I got to know them very well. I get along really well with all of them. I don't think Callum won that fight. Let's just be honest. John Ryder did everything he did. By the way, Zach Parker, Demetrius Andrade, who claims to be ducked by everybody, including, King Kong, Sugar Ray Robinson, and Marvin Hagler, didn't want to take the Parker fight. In fact, he dropped out of one fight, didn't want to do the second purse bid, right? Didn't like that offer. Zach Parker did what he had to earn that, and he fought a hell of a fight. It was really one of the most courageous things that I've seen. But it goes to show you that Canelo was judged by such a harsh standard that this is a guy, think about this. He's been a pro fighter for 17 out of his 32 years on this earth. That means for more than half his life, he's getting punched in the face for a living. And this is now his 64th fight. And people are questioning, well, is he slipping? I would hope so. What do you think? No one's ascending after 64 fights. It's not possible. Come on.
Steve, listen, it's been a true pleasure. I'm so grateful that you've been on. And if you are ever in London for a big fight or anything, please let me know.
It's on my bucket list. We got to hang out. We got to get a few pints.
The drinks are on me, Steve. I really appreciate it.
All right, buddy.
Thank you so much.
We'll do this again soon. Really appreciate you, man.
Please, I'd really appreciate it. Thanks very much. And I'm looking forward to tuning into the 3 Knockdown Rule. Don't forget, everybody, to tune in. Thanks so much, Steve. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. God bless.